Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Friends, I come to you today, and from Jump Street, I'd like to say that we have a disease in this country that people don't talk about a lot. And I would submit to you that the diseases that we have that fall into this category are only further exacerbated by the individuals that are intent upon treating that disease, because we're seeing this played out over and over and over again. And unfortunately, when these diseases go untreated, they don't just impact the individual that is suffering from the disease. It has a way of extending out to others peripherally, and sometimes ending fatally. Today, we're going to talk about the case of Lindsay Clancy and the murder of her 3 babies. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, I'm going to tell you from Jump Street, I hate this case. I've been resistant to make a public statement about it. I've turned down appearances on shows and this sort of thing because it's really hard to extricate my emotion from this. And my emotion stems from not so much that it is these 3 precious lives that are now gone. It's the fact that there's a redundancy to it, that this is self-repeating over and over and over again, where you've got individuals that are medicated up to their eyeballs with this toxic stew flowing through their veins, and they are literally being cut loose on the rest of society by the psychiatric community. And I'll go ahead and plainly say it right now. And I think that Lindsay Clancy, I'll go ahead and say from the beginning, she has stated that she took the lives of her children. She has stated that plainly. She's not the only one that should be charged here, as far as I'm concerned.
The problem with covering the case of Lindsay Clancy, and I have covered it a couple of times on Nancy Grace, and we were covering the trial the other day, and one of the psychs on the show got really mad about something I was saying. But the problem with this case is the fact that there's a lot of sympathy for a mother going through postpartum. And I get that. I do. And so I tread lightly like everybody else because it is a very difficult thing. Many of us remember Tom Cruise challenging everybody basically, to a fist fight over Brooke Shields, claiming postpartum, when Tom Cruise said he knew more than everybody else about it because of Scientology. He
was on there with Matt Lauer.
Yeah, Matt Lauer.
Yeah.
And granted, regardless of what kind of person Matt Lauer was, at the time, head to head, you would think, yeah, Joe, you're not looking good, Tom. But here's the thing. This is not a show about psychology or sociology or anything else that blurs the lines of guilt and innocence. What we're dealing with here are 3 children who I try to imagine their last moments. We're talking about Callan, who was 8 months old, Cora, who was 5 years old, and Dawson, who was 3. Joe, based on where these children were found inside the Clancy home, I think Dawson, at 3 years old, was running for his life from his mother. I think, and we'll talk about this coming up, but you've got 3 children under the age of 5 who were killed by their mother, and some people want to excuse her for that behavior, saying that she couldn't help herself due to postpartum depression. This is an ongoing case. She is not guilty until proven that way in court. She's pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. My curiosity here, and I hate to say that because it seems like I'm not being sympathetic or empathetic about the children. I want to know how this so-called mother was able to kill 3 children using exercise bands, the stretchy bands, and what it would take to be able to accomplish this feat, and how long would it take? Does it take a child? Is it more difficult to strangle a child than an adult?
Yeah.
I'm just curious because we know that their bones are still growing and they're still softer. And anyway, all of these things are something to talk about, and all of it's getting left in the dirt because
Yeah.
people want to argue about postpartum and whether Lindsay Clancy should get away with murder.
Well, hey, let me put you in check about something real quick.
Okay.
Because you used a term just a second ago, so-called mother.
Oh.
She is a mother,
Mm-hmm.
and she made a decision. Now, how that decision was made, I think, rests greatly in how her brain is being affected chemically. There's no way, I don't think, that we can escape that. And for her now, having admitted to this, I think one of the big questions is, Brother Dave, is that was she looking for an easier life, absent children, that they had become too much of a burden for her? And that's always a question that comes up in these cases. We have a name for these cases. They're called family annihilators. And people forget about that, right?
Wow.
Because,
Yeah.
you think about it's some guy that walks in with a gun and shoots, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, you go back years and years, and there are countless numbers of these cases where you will have mothers that are dealing with postpartum depression, and it can turn violent many times. I think that it's further exacerbated by the chemistry experiment that's going on, Dave, in their systems, because they're not being properly treated. And, you think about if someone had, and listen, everybody's a Monday morning quarterback, right? If somebody had interdicted the situation in an appropriate manner early on, we would not be having this discussion. Let me tell you what other discussion we would not be having, because this is something else that happens in our society, and I can testify to it, brother. I'm about to preach now. This goes out to the media, because when she came out of that window and impacted, if she had died at that moment, and I know this story would not have made it through 3 or 4 news cycles. It would just be another case of people saying, yeah, well, today, 3 children died, but the perpetrator died, murder-suicide. Hey, what else do we have to cover today? But that's not what's happening here, is it? We've got this woman who says that she committed this crime and attempted to take her own life in the wake of it. But yet the problem, I think, that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the problem that I think you and I both have is that there's an awareness. There's an awareness. This is not like this goblin kind of swooped down out of the air and decided to beset this woman. She has a thought pattern here, that you can't escape, right?
Well, there actually is, with this case, a plan of Lindsay. Look, to understand what happened, or no, try to understand.
Yeah.
I think you have to try to look at the whole thing and realize that Lindsay Clancy was having trouble emotionally keeping up with what was happening in her changing family with 3 children. And the family recognized this. Okay. Her husband adjusted his work so that he could work from home to help with the children. Her in-laws came and helped. There were people stepping up and providing more help for Lindsay Clancy than anyone I know of, And I think that's important to point out, that there was something going on with her, that family members and others recognized this is not a good situation. So I think my problem, Joe, is that you do have all of these other people around her recognizing the problem and trying to stand in the gap to help her, to provide a bridge, from where she is today to getting to a healthy place here. She had plenty of interaction with those in the psychological community, doctors and what have you, and medication. For crying out loud, she had a pharmacy. And these medications, I took this list because I want to address something about taking medication, friends, and that is when it's prescribed to you, you take it as directed or not at all, okay? You don't adjust the dosage. People do this for all types of reasons, and it's ridiculous because the doctor is prescribing medication based on their expectation of what it will do to the patient at this magnitude, at this level of dosage. And if you change that dosage and you go back to the doctor and you're still exhibiting signs and other symptoms of the problem, the doctor is saying, well, I was having her take 50 milligrams of XYZ and it's not getting the desired effect. We need to get something else. Meanwhile, she was only taking 5 milligrams of XYZ. And so the doctor's prescribing based on what he thinks versus what she's doing.
Well, let me throw this out at you too.
Yeah.
You've got somebody that, according to the psychiatric community, is in need of help. Let's start there. Okay.
All right. Okay.
You're in need of help. So, and I think that there has been along the way, there was an admission into a facility, where she had stayed.
Talking about when she went on her own?
Yeah.
The last time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she's going there on her own because she's recognizing something in her brain. And here's the problem. You're prescribing medications, right? And dude, the list that you put together is as long as my arm. And it's a combination, a huge swath of drugs here that we're talking about. Probably one of the most insidious drugs that's on this list is Seroquel, which is a dark, dark drug. It's an antipsychotic drug. And it takes people to dark, dark places. It really does. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous medication on top of all of these other kind of mood altering drugs that she's on, and anti-anxiety things, all these things along the way. So back to what I was saying, I started chasing rabbits there. Sorry. But you've got somebody that is so debilitated mentally, and you're going to give them medication as as their point of contact, and you're expecting them to go home with all of these meds and figure it out for yourself, and then admonish them if they adjust it on any level. Because, can you imagine? It's like sending somebody into it's like sending somebody into a chemistry lab that is in harm's way in their own mind or in their heart or whatever it is. And you got to figure this out. You've got to figure out the formula. How do you do that? How do you do that? We've really lost sight in this country, and I'll say it. And this is why I can say it. When I started my career in New Orleans, I think I've mentioned this before. One of the duties in the coroner's office in New Orleans, did you know it was committals?
No.
Yeah, we used to sign, the coroner investigators would go out and meet with families, and we would draw up what were called orders of protective custody, OPCs. And you had them in a couple of degrees. You had one that you could write up, and it would send them to the hospital for like 24 hours of observation. Then you had a longer one that's mandated a week, and then a deputy coroner, who is a psychiatrist, would go in and make the decision if person needed to be committed. Now here we are. We're not supposed to use that word anymore, right? Okay, we're gonna use it on body bags.
Wait a minute, we're not allowed to use committed?
Well, people get in such a twist over it.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, people who should be committed getting
we're going to talk about it. The reason long-term stays are essential to good mental health is that if you have someone that is so desperately debilitated, they don't need to get on a phone call with you on telehealth to find out how you're doing today. Because these conditions, if you're going to make a diagnosis of someone that is suffering from these issues, essentially what you're doing in the psychiatric community is you're handing these people a loaded gun and allowing them to leave it out in the open for their families to be around. I'll put it to you that way. Because you don't know what's going to happen. And then you're putting in all these various ingredients into their everyday life. You can't predict the stressors that are around them. You can't predict the domestic discord that's going on. You can't predict the kid that's sick and you can't attend to them, the kid that needs a diaper change, the kid that just wants mommy to hug them. You can't predict that in a telehealth call or whatever in the hell it is that you're doing. You know where you can predict it? When you get them into a controlled environment for about a month. And you can decide, we're not sitting on the outside and playing around with meds. We've got to adjust this here. You know what? You need to be held to account for this. The whole, this trial and this right now today, and I'll say this plainly on Body Bags, this trial is not just about Lindsay Clancy and these 3 precious lives. This trial is raising serious questions in this country about the care that people are receiving that desperately need it and is not being appropriately provided in the world of mental health. Well, Brother Dave, here at Body Bags, you and I, our focus is the dead, right? And let's turn to these deaths, because out of all this other stuff, that's connected with this case, it's very easy for the public to lose sight of these precious babies. And that is the most, I think for us, it is the essential theme for all of this, because obviously we wouldn't be having this discussion if their lives had not been taken from them.
Joe, look, the psychology of all of this is one thing. But again, there are 3 children who are dead. We're talking about 5 years old, 3 years old, and 8 months. You've got 3 dead children, and their mother is on trial for killing them. It's really what they're trying to decide at court is responsibility. And was Lindsay Clancy responsible for the deaths of her children? And I've caught grief over this because I've said many things, and I just, here's why, Joe, is when we break down what happened to these children and how long it took, because I'm really curious, and I'm hoping you can help me understand the children and their deaths and what it took to get there. Because it wasn't like she grabbed the children and went off, and did this. Remember Susan Smith? Yes. When Susan Smith killed her 2 boys, she did it because, well, she was in love with a guy that didn't want children, apparently. And so she decided, I'm just going to get rid of mine and then everything will be fine. And then she made up a crazy story that was just racist and horrible. Other women, Andrea Yates comes to mind, she killed her children. Each time we do a case like this, people forget about the victims. And I'm tired of that. So I want to know what happened. And you start wherever you want, but you have Cora, 5 years old. Dawson was 3 years old. And Callan was just 8 months old.
8 months, yeah.
How did these children die, Joe?
It was not a quick death for any of these kids. We've got an 8-month-old, of course, that is flown from the scene and via life flight and, survived. Days, yeah.
Yeah.
We've got two other children that are removed from the scene and taken and are shortly pronounced, there at the hospital. But I think that one of the interesting things scientifically, I think, is the methodology that she chose in order to facilitate their deaths. It almost comes down to, because it's an unusual weapon of choice, and I'm talking about these exercise bands. To say that there's an elasticity to them is an understatement. If our friends out there will think about the static nature of just nylon rope, okay, that many of us have, or a bit of kite string, and yes, that can be used, piece of wire, a belt, all right. And I'm talking about these being utilized as a ligature, and this has been stated in the court record that there's evidence of ligature markings. Um, Elastic bands, though, are particularly difficult to facilitate because of the elasticity. You're always having to readjust this, and there's a couple of points along the way. When I was considering this, I was thinking about the some comments were made about Cora and Dawson. They have what are being termed as ligature related injuries of the head and neck. So what does that say to me? Well, for me, it says that if you're trying to adjust a ligature on the neck, you've got somebody, precious child, that is resistant. And so as they're moving like this back and forth, that band is actually moving up the back of their head. And you could actually appreciate, if somebody is doing this or this, you could actually appreciate marks on the surface of the head. I think that probably what they're saying is superior to the jawline up the back in this area, saying this is the head, and then you go down to the neck right here. And we've actually got furrows that are mentioned as well. Well, furrows are different. They're a different classification of ligature. They're evidence of ligature. But with a furrow, Dave, that means that you have to get the subject into a static position so that you can apply enough pressure where it's going to depress the neck, and it's going to cut a rut. I say cut, it's not really cut. It's going to impress onto the soft surface of the skin and create a furrow. And when I say furrow, this is a vision I like people to have in their mind. Think of a plowed field, and a plow being drugged down a field. For all you city folks who've never been out to the country and you've seen people putting in the crops in the spring, it cuts a furrow in the field, and it's like a channel. That's what it looks like on the surface of the neck. Now, they come in different forms. So if we've got somebody, say for instance, that has a furrow in their neck, they can be pulled back like this, and that furrow will run parallel to the shoulders. Now, in cases of hanging, okay, you've got the furrow that goes up, and you and I have talked extensively about tenting feature, right? That can create a furrow as well. But here's the other thing about these precious babies, is that this is not the only insults they had to the body. And what I think, extrapolate from what the medical examiners see and then testified to these findings at autopsy. There's two forensic pathologists, which is very interesting in this case, Dave. You've got you've got one primary that is doing one autopsy, and you've got another one that is not only a forensic pathologist, but also a neuropathologist.
What's the difference?
Well, the neuropathologists, they study diseases and injuries of any of the nervous tissue, including the brain, spinal cord, all these sorts of things. So they're invaluable to have on a medical examiner staff, because so much of the stuff that we do has to do with like head trauma, people being in car accidents, with severed spinal cord, all these sorts of things. And also, you know what else they're really good at? Some of the best forensic pathology. And I'm thinking about one lady that I hold her in very high esteem up in St. Louis. She was also cross certified as a neuropathologist. You know what they're really good at? Child abuse cases,
Oh,
because of
wow.
things like shaken baby and ongoing um, cerebral trauma, to children, seeing long-term effects and, what you can expect out of that. So anyway, when you don't just have one pair of eyes on these three babies. You've got two that are involved in this case, and you've got separate sets of testimony here. And this is kind of it doesn't mean a lot maybe to people that are not commonly trial watchers, but you generally don't have this happen in a criminal case where you're going to have two forensic pathologists.
It seems odd because of the reason that they're fighting the case anyway. I mean, why do you need two people in there to testify about how the children were killed when the defense is
Yeah.
she killed the children due to postpartum?
You have to demonstrate it. And the reason it's being parsed out like this is the fact that you've got one individual that is doing one case, and you've got another that's doing the two others. And so
Why?
they'll, because they wanted to probably lighten the load, these cases are very intense.
Okay.
Okay. And it's not like a simple gunshot wound.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, though, Joe. We've got them separated. We've got the children separated. We have 5-year-old Cora and 8-month-old Callan. They're together. They're all in the basement,
Yep.
but they're together. Meanwhile, Dawson is all the way across the basement in his dad's office.
Mm-hmm.
Is this because the 8-month-old can't get away? The 8-month-old at best is rolling or crawling, and probably
Right.
not even that.
No.
So the 8-month-old is not going to be able to get away, but you've got a 5-year-old, she can run, and you got a 3-year-old, he can toddle around a good bit. So how did their murders take place in that basement, Joe? Or
I think
can we figure that out?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that probably if you're the perpetrator, you're going to single out the one that is going to give you the most resistance and try to separate them from the rest of the kids. That's
Mhm.
my opinion. I don't know that could ever be proven.
Okay.
But these children have insults up and down their arms. Okay, like little
Arms?
bruises, red marks. Guess what they were doing? They were fighting.
Oh my gosh.
So just let that resonate with you just for a moment.
Come on. I thought we
When-
weren't going to have that.
Well, yeah, you do, because even at a primal level, babies react if oxygen, if they're in if they're being deprived of oxygen, our lizard brain kind of kicks in. You're trying to fight this kind of thing. Now, the older a subject is, the more of an awareness there is. So that 5-year-old would have felt fear,
Wow.
because this is not what mommy normally does.
Right.
I extend that to the 3-year-old as well. So you're going to have these resistant marks. When people are, we're not talking, I'm making a reference here to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, with Jack Nicholson's character. He's been lobotomized, he's in the bed. But you remember in that scene, they even depicted it where he's fighting. He's fighting
when
the chief.
When Chief puts the pillow over his face.
And I think that's kind of accurate,
Okay.
probably as much as it can be with Hollywood.
Right.
These children are not in a compromised state. They're
Right.
going to fight back and resist. We see this in adults all the time. So I think that can probably account for the markings that we're seeing. This is not something where, that your primal brain will say, yeah, we're just going to be completely compliant here, and you can rob us of our life.
Joe, when we're talking about strangling children with this elastic band, as you mentioned earlier about resetting and all that, but how long is it going to take? Is there any way to know how long it would take, and how long it would take before the victim, a 5-year-old girl in this case, as we talk about Cora, would she'll be fighting back, but at what point, how long would it take to lose consciousness? Is there any way to know that?
I think that's an excellent question, Brother Dave. And I think that one of the difficulties with trying to come up with an acceptable answer for that, let's say if Cora was subjected to a ligature, and it's not an lab, let's just say it's a belt. All right, leather belt. She's held in one place. Doesn't really resist. Okay. Probably after 2.5 minutes with constant pressure, her brain's going to go to sleep. Okay. She's going to pass out. Okay. It's just oxygen deprivation at that point in time. Now, if that is continued for probably another 30 to 45 seconds, maybe out to a minute, you're going to have death. All right. Okay. Now, the problem and what makes this so horrific, going back to what I'd mentioned about these kind of peripheral insults, is the fact that it stopped and it started. It stopped and it started. Okay. Because it's not one of these concrete markers where you can say, yeah, it was over in an instant. It's not like somebody, capping somebody in the back of the head, and executing them like that. That is not the same thing. It is just not. That's why when I see this and I think about out of all of the things in that house that you could have used as a fatal instrumentality, like a ligature, why is this your default position? You're going to go to the elastic bands or to the exercise bands with elasticity. Why is this going to be your choice? Because shoestrings would have been, and I've had those. The shoestrings would have been more merciful than these things because there's all this adjustment that's having to take place. I submit to you, if it was an older person, somebody else that was more beefy, you get up into like an 8-9-year-old child, that area right there, you would have really have had a fight on your hands because it's kind of like trying to hold Jell-O. You really have to push it, to that point. That's probably over the top example, but you know what I'm saying? It's just different than using, you had said twine. That's
Right.
an excellent example. Because of the structural integrity of this thing. It's kind of a weird thing to choose.
Well, it's like I was thinking about twine because if you've ever moved anything, and again, I go back to mattresses, because a lot of us can identify with having to put a mattress on top of your vehicle and tying it down. And if you have used those elastic type bands, because it makes sense at first, they stretch, you can get them. You have to constantly get out and readjust. And so
you do. Yeah. Like you're talking about bungee cords.
Right. Bungee cords. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. As opposed to those ratchet straps. You know what I'm talking about? You talk about static,
Yep.
And this thing is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I think that's an excellent word picture, Dave, for our friends out there to try to understand what you're talking about.
Right.
The elasticity here and why it's certainly not favorable if you're looking, to be as efficient. I hate to use that term. But, when you think about the selection, and again, going back into the mental health stuff temporarily, was her selection affected by that? Oh, I see a strap. I think I'm going to use that. And they're not really thinking about what the functional utility of this thing is. And this just makes it all the more horrible, in my estimation. One of the beautiful things that I love about my grandbabies is that for a brother and sister that are their ages, they get along so swimmingly and they play together all the time. They really do. My grandson is older than my granddaughter, and he's very patient with his sister. And you spend that time, and what a precious amount of time that is, growing up, and you're around your siblings and you actually love one another and you're not trying to kill each other. These babies will never have that that opportunity. And I think about an 8-month-old just coming into the family, right? And there's still life in this child. And I got to tell you, Dave, it goes to, I think it's weird. The good Lord creates us, I think, to the point where when we're young, tries to protect us because we're unstable, as infants, right? Our skulls are soft. You don't get fractured skulls most of the time with babies when they hit the ground, because the skulls are so soft, and here's that word, there's an elasticity. The younger you are,
Right.
It can kind of bounce back from things. You take you and I now, if you and I step off a curb wrong, we're going to be in ICU. So,
Right. And Joe, that's
Yeah.
why I wondered with these children, we have the two older children that, yes, they were taken from the scene, but they were already gone, but 8-month-old Callan was not. 8-month-old Callan was taken to the hospital alive and survived for a couple of days. Now, I don't know if, and Joe, maybe you can clarify, because there's a difference between being alive with a possible future and being
Yeah.
kept alive by doctors and current medicine.
Yeah.
Is
And
that
being
a
on-
good statement?
yeah, being on the machinery
Right.
of the hospital. And here's one of the things that would have been going on. They're going to be checking for brain activity,
Okay.
and they'll call it from a neurological standpoint, and they'll say there's so little brain activity here that there's no chance that this child is going to be rescued from the situation, and they let the child go, or the child will in fact, it doesn't matter what kind of intervention you do, they're not going to survive. And I think that's it's one of the things. Can I impart something else to you here as well? Because these cases that I've seen over the years where you've got multiple victims, single perpetrator, there is also a fatigue factor that comes in on the part of the perpetrator. Do they have, just think about this, and I'd love to address this with you because you brought it up. You have these pauses, right, between each murder. Okay. It's enough of a pause so that you're catching your breath, but you're so exhausted, I would imagine, after the adrenaline dump and everything else that goes into this. And also the awareness, maybe she had enough lucidity about her to understand, I've just murdered my children. Maybe by the time it comes to the 8-month-old, there's very little left in the tank. And maybe it was a half-hearted effort at that point, but enough of an effort to do significant, obviously fatal damage in the long run, because child is not going to survive.
But she still had enough wherewithal to cut herself on the wrist and the neck, I believe, and creating enough blood upstairs in the bedroom that it was a shocking, bloody scene. And then jumping out of the second floor window, where she is found, Lindsay Clancy is found by her husband as he first arrives. And I've always found that as odd. Not odd that he found her, but odd because if I was to arrive home, Joe, and I found my wife, who over the last several months, years, has had some issues, and now I find her bloody, near death in the backyard on the ground, my first thought is, where are the children?
Yeah.
And that was not Patrick Clancy's first thoughts, or at least not right away. He was tending to her and calling 911, and it was after help arrived that he goes looking for the kids. I've always found that as odd. So maybe,
and I don't know what kind of stressors really kick in the brain relative to that, because first off, he's visualizing something that is, and this is a gross understatement on my part, but he's visualizing something that's completely out of the norm, right?
Right.
That's it's like a pop in the face all of a sudden. Like, how do I make it through this? He's not even thinking probably about the horror that awaits him inside
Right.
of this house. And how do you put out this fire first? You know?
Okay. That makes sense. I am so glad you said that because that makes sense, Joe. I've tried figuring that out. You know, in my little pea brain, I've tried to figure out why. And that does make sense because he is worried about his wife. He is trying to show her that he believes in her and is gone for a substantial amount of time. He even talks to her in the middle of all of what's going on, Joe. Patrick Clancy calls Lindsay because he's at CVS and needs to know exactly what he's there to pick up.
Yeah.
And she's in the middle of killing the children when that happens and acts normal enough that it doesn't surprise him. So when he arrives home, yeah, okay. Now I get why he would be tunnel vision focused on her
Yeah.
and not actually thinking about the children at that
Yeah. I
moment.
mean, the last thing you're thinking about when you arrive home from Walgreens or CVS or whatever the case might be is seeing your wife in the yard splayed out and there's blood everywhere, and so it's truly a shock to the system at that moment in time. I would think enough to put you off. And he's not really on target anyway. There's nothing to be on target about. It's just his daily life that he's going about. And this guy's probably been swinging from vine to vine for a while, just trying to make it through each day because it is a grind. It is an incredible grind. You've got 3 babies at home, which are preeminent above everything else. I don't care what you say. They trump everything else. Okay. Whatever your issues are, whatever the case might be. And then you've got a wife that is debilitated to the point where she requires a chemical list that is so nutty just on its face. When you see all of this stuff that she's, that's being given to her, and she's expected to try to keep up the routine of taking all the medication, she's making adjustments. And here's another thing. She's a healthcare provider.
Right.
And I hear a lot of people, and I believe in this too. You never walk into a doctor's office and just blindly do what they tell you to do. You have to be your own advocate. But if you're in such a debilitated state mentally, at what point in time, who's going to advocate for you? Because they're working off of a cookbook, recipe book. This is how we treat people. This is the medication that we give them. They've got their other book over here, the DSM, that tells them how to diagnose people. These are the meds that we're going to use. This is the combination that we're going to use. But the problem is they keep adding meds to this thing all along the way. And it's mind blowing, and it shouldn't be, because let me tell you something, friends. Out there right now, all across America, there are people dealing with this same thing. Okay? They're dealing with a sack full of medications, and no hope is in sight, because you'll just have more chemicals thrown at you without proper supervision. I submit to you that if Lindsay Clancy had been admitted for a protracted period of time to get everything just right, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. I don't know where this road leads. I really don't, because it's getting worse and worse. We're seeing people that are showing up, committing mass killings, and they're on a litany of medications. The Lindsay Clancy case to me is no different than that. I think that the source of it is chemicals and a lack of true application of what's referred to as the therapeutic model. It ain't happening. I don't know where we go. I really don't. But I got to tell you, the world is a much sadder place because of these 3 little lives that have been extinguished. And each and every one of them need to be remembered. All three of these children that had lives, that had the potential to do great things with their lives, to be married, to have children of their own, generations have now been wiped out. So for Cora, Dawson, and Callan, we're dedicating this episode of Body Bags because it is about them. It's not about their mama. It's about a potential that we were all robbed of because these little lives have been snuffed out. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.